cross-country chicanery. At 19, I decided it was time to move to Los Angeles and become a celebrity. I didn't know what exact vocation I would end up in, but I had strong opinions about a lot of things, and I thought the world would be a better place if I shared them. I had completed 1.5 semesters at a community college in Morristown, New Jersey, where I realized rather quickly that I'd be better off skipping college and moving to California. I was very inspired by Three's Company and their lifestyle on that show. I was eager to strap on a pair of rollerblades and stroll down the Strand, telling everyone, "Come and knock on my door." When I told my parents my plan, they said they thought it was a good idea. In my father's words, "Good, please go. I'll get one of the cars ready." Being that he was a used car dealer, he always had cars, but none of them were ever ready to actually drive. He hooked me up with an oil change and transmission check, and then bought me 4 new tires for my 1985 stick-shift silver Audi Quattro. I'd never seen my father as enthusiastic about spending money as he was paying for those new tires. That's how happy he was that I was moving 3,000 miles away. I dug that car until I drove its transmission straight into the ground. The night before I was set to drive across the country alone, my brother Glenn came over to the house and told me he had met a bartender who also happened to be heading across country and was looking for a ride. My brothers have never been overly protective of me, and this was a classic example of how little regard for my safety they had. "Sounds good, as long as he can afford to chip in for hotels and gas money," I told Glenn. The next night, I picked up a 25 or 26-year-old short blonde man from his parents' house somewhere in northern New Jersey. I can't remember this person's name, but one of the first sentences out of his mouth was, "Should we drive to Harlem first and get some cocaine for the ride?" I had experimented with cocaine before, but it wasn't a passion of mine at the time. I had zeroed a little interest in doing it while driving across country, but I was excited to go to Harlem with someone who knew their way around. Harlem had been off limits when I was a teenager, and when we went to the city in high school, it was mostly to a nightclub called the Limelight, where we dropped acid and ecstasy. Cocaine seemed like an older person's drug, but I liked this guy's spunk, so we headed off to Harlem. I sat in my car on 146th Street while he went inside a house for about 20 minutes and came out with a bag of cocaine the size of an airplane pillow. I had only seen bags of drugs that massive in the movies, and I was flabbergasted at the sheer volume. He reported that this was a pound of cocaine and that it would be his contribution to the trip. I told him that I didn't really do cocaine and that he would have to pitch in financially for lodging and gas, which I thought my brother had explained. He clarified that it wasn't a problem and that if I wanted the cash instead of the cocaine, we could easily sell some of it along the way. I envisioned myself driving across country while slowly transitioning into a coke dealer, and then having to call my brother from behind bars upon my first arrest, probably in Texas. From Harlem, we drove down to Maryland and headed for Route 66, which takes you straight across the country to California. There was a long detour through Washington, D.C., and many lanes were shut down on the highway for repair. By this time, it was late at night, and my passenger, whom I'll refer to as Dipsy Doodle, had taken out several large maps, while also scooping cocaine out of the bag with his bank card and snorting it. I was confused by the panoply of maps. This was before cell phones and satellite navigation and all that, but how many maps of one country did a person need? There are 3 highways that take you across the United States, and it is a pretty straight shot, so this behavior was suspect. All I could think of was my brother Glenn and his lackluster ability to make choices that were in my best interest. Dipsy Doodle was talking a lot about all the different options we had to zigzag across the country and all the national parks we could hit up on our way. I didn't have the patience to explain that we weren't going to hit up any national parks and that I was trying to get to my aunt's house in Bel Air as soon as humanly possible, and that the only reason he was with me was so I wouldn't have to drive across the country as a single 19-year-old female. Seeing the condition he was in made it clear that if anyone would be taking care of anyone in this situation, it would be me taking care of him and not the other way around. By the time we got to Maryland, Dipsy Doodle hadn't stopped talking for 4 straight hours. I needed a break. I told him that we were going to have to pull over for the night at whatever Howard Johnson or Holiday Inn we found next. We checked into a room with 2 double beds where Dipsy Doodle proceeded to lay out his map collection all over the coffee table in bed, continuing to talk about all the sightseeing we could do. He was somehow under the impression that we were on a retirement trip of sorts, and that we had all the time in the world to explore every nook and cranny of America. At this point, I was lying in my bed, calculating how fast we could actually get to Los Angeles if we only stopped for gas. Dipsy Doodle hadn't even bothered to bring his suitcase into the hotel because he explained he'd be up all night doing cocaine and mapping out our drive. I fell asleep to the sound of him snorting cocaine off one of the maps, and when I woke up in the morning, he was pacing back and forth throughout the room, looking like Dog the Bounty Hunter. I don't know if Dog the Bounty Hunter does copious amounts of cocaine, but he sure looks like he does. I got up, brushed my teeth, might have taken a shower, and then told my driving partner that I was going to pack up the car and that I'd be right back. When I got to the parking lot where my car was, I opened the trunk, took his suitcase out, placed it in the parking space next to my car, and drove away. You didn't have to be a member of Mensa to realize this guy was going to be a massive liability. I hauled ass across country, avoiding all truck stops, and only stopped for gas until I got pulled over in Amarillo, Texas, on Route 66 by a state trooper. State troopers seem petrifying to me at 19 years old, and I was definitely scared. The trooper strode up to my driver's side window with a large black German shepherd, who proceeded to go apeshit when he got to the trunk area of my car, which was where Dipsy Doodle had stored the cocaine for an hour before we got to Maryland, when he became paranoid that cops were following us. The state trooper asked me to step out of my car after I handed him my license and registration, and then sternly directed me to take 50 steps behind the car. I stood on the side of Route 66 with 18-wheelers passing me, imagining a life behind bars, all before I even had the chance to make a name for myself in Hollywood. I devised my defense if the trooper in his very intimidating, wide-brimmed trooper's hat put me in handcuffs. I would insist that they dust my car for fingerprints in order to prove there had been another person in my car whom I had the good sense to leave in Maryland, and that they could test me for cocaine and realized I had nothing to do with the drug. My story would be that once I knew that Dipsy Doodle had cocaine on him, I kicked him out of the car. The fact that I drove him in my car to pick up the cocaine would be omitted from the tale. As another 18-wheeler blew past me standing on the side of the highway, I almost fell over at the intensity of the wind. After 20 minutes of a thorough examination of my car, the trooper informed me that I was free to go because they had not found anything incriminating, even though the dog's reaction suggested otherwise. I pulled back onto the highway with both legs shaking and didn't stop for anything other than gas for the rest of the trip. I arrived in California 17 hours later. When I reached my aunt and uncle's house in Los Angeles, I told them the whole story. My uncle responded by asking me to confirm that all the cocaine was indeed gone. I haven't done cocaine in ages, he said. I wouldn't mind a big fat line. That night I called my brother Glenn, who is now on Martha's Vineyard with my parents. I thanked him for setting me up with the complete basket case to drive across the country with, and told him that his judgment needed an update. In very Glenn-like fashion, he seemed nonplussed. Yes, he said, I heard your driving companion had to hire a taxi from Maryland back to Morris Plains, New Jersey. Good for him, I said. Our first order of business was going to Harlem so your friend could buy a pound of cocaine. I went on to tell Glenn about being pulled over in the panhandle of Texas, and that if I hadn't left my driving companion in Maryland, I'd be in a Texas state prison right now, getting finger blasted by a female prison guard. So thanks for that referral, I said, and hung up. No one was going to stop me from getting to LA and starting my life. When an obstacle arose in the form of Dipsy Doodle, I removed said obstacle.